I've had 45 of my students ask me what exactly does a consultant do? These are the four things every consultant does.
Okay, so what exactly does a consultant do? Well, it can be really confusing because it often is seen as a 21-year-old helping a 45-year-old with a question about their own business, either small, medium-sized, or even large enterprise-sized businesses. But reality is that a consultant is simply a person that solves problems by asking a ton of questions, doing the research, and building mock-ups, and then eventually, at the end of the day, they're also salesmen that sell other projects to that client. So, what the consultant does is they start with a problem. So, this can be the client coming to them and saying, "Hey, I want to enter a market," or it could be something along the lines of, "What are my competitors doing?" And at the end of the day, this is something like a client can do on their own, but they have other projects that they might be working on. There might be a limit of resources, or this might be something that they're not fully equipped to handle. If you're a small sized business, you're not necessarily having all the resources the same way Amazon might have. And even businesses at that scale do use consulting. GE used it to have a huge transformation. Netflix used it to go from selling DVDs or renting DVDs to streaming. And so you always want a consultant to basically just look at a problem from a third party source. Then what a consultant does is it asks questions. Now, there's a common saying that there's the difference between what the client said and what you heard. So let me just make sure that's very clear in understanding. I'll go into that in more depth, but basically, it's like the telephone game, except even if there's two people, there is a loss of what is wanted and what is done. And a consultant doesn't want that, like, they do some project because they heard or understood what was said differently than how it was actually said. And as such, they ask a lot of questions to the client itself before they even start any project. Then they go into research, which is along the lines of qualitative, which is like he said, she said, or quantitative, which is like percentages, probabilities, numbers. And there's also primary and secondary, which is essentially interviews versus like market reports. And then finally, there's a solution, and this can be a mock up or a PowerPoint or a speech. And essentially, this is going to be like for Netflix's case, like I think PwC or BCG created their like mock up streaming service, or for CNN, McKinsey created CNN Plus. Now, CNN Plus was a fail, but they created the mock up for it after they did a lot of qualitative, quantitative, primary, and secondary research. They asked what the client asked. They really questioned it a ton, so they understood it in like every form in detail. And they were asked, the problem was, I want to enter the streaming market from CNN, for example. Now, to go into problem, the questions you want to ask are, what are the project goals? So if the goal is like, I want to enter, like if the problem is I want to enter the market, well, what's the goal? Are you trying to sell a new product? Are you trying to sell your own product to a different demographic? Are you trying to enter this market because you are seeing loss of revenue somewhere else? Because oftentimes a client can come to the consultant with one problem and leave with a completely different one after the consultant says, like, actually, like, I've worked on projects similar to this. My industry expertise says it is otherwise. So that's the first question. Really understanding, why is the project problem there? Why was this project even like proposed internally? And that goes into, why did the project come up? And so you want to understand, who are the stakeholders that are asking for this project? Like, who is the one behind the person on call might not necessarily be the one who created the project or sold it, or internally, or asked for a consulting firm to come in. Additionally, like, there's sometimes politics happening in a company. There's the McKinsey effect, which is often that stakeholders, like executive board members, will pressure managers to follow through with some project that the managers know sucks, but the board members are too like separated from the company to understand that that project sucks. So the manager will hire a consulting firm to build that project out, because if the project fails, then the manager doesn't lose their job, because they can say, like, actually the consulting firm did this, so clearly it's on my fault. Um, and then also, like, why did the project come up? Like, same thing as before. Is it a revenue problem? Is it a cost problem? Um, Usually those are the two problems every company has, because every company's goal is to make a profit. Then you want to ask, what is the timeline of this project? Is this a project where the you want time to market to be quick. Time to market is a concept where you want to get into the market quickly because whoever moves first, there's a mover's advantage, first mover's advantage, where whoever moves first gets a lot of the market share really quickly. So Facebook, for example, was despite MySpace being out there and Foursquare and other startups, it tried to go very quickly. And that's why it also didn't try to like sell ads or make any revenue for the first 7 years because it had a first mover's advantage. Whoever got on Facebook first likely would make it their main social networking or like platform. And now you have people that are in multiple different platforms, but back then that was the thesis. Like that was the idea that if you got in quickly, you'd get the whole company. And same with Google, where they wanted all people to be on their search engine. Now they have 95% of the control. Same with Amazon. They tried not to make any money on Amazon.com because they wanted to beat every other e-commerce store really quickly. So you need to understand the timeline. Is this a project that the client wants in a year or in 6 months? CNN Plus was a fail, but it was likely a fail because they were given a very short timeline as well. They were given about like 6 months, 8 months to create the whole streaming app, get it like actually proven that the people wanted it. People didn't, by the way, but like to get it proven that they wanted it, and it failed. And that's not to say like news networks or networks like that can't have streaming services. Peacock, for example, is it's not as big as Netflix or Disney Plus, but it's owned by MSNBC. Now, MSNBC kind of like isn't that big of a network, but they still have a very, very profitable streaming service because they went about it right correctly. They took their time, and you have to understand the timeline. And with that, um, there's budget. And so at the end of the day, like consultants get billed out at hundreds, if not thousands of dollars an hour. And you have to understand what is the client's budget because the client might be even sponsoring some of the research being done. So is it okay if you hire, researchers for a few $1,000s a day to help you with this project, or do you need to employ lower end consultants, or do you need to bring in bench consultants which are just like sitting on the sidelines, or is this something that like the partners will be handling directly? And lastly, what are the long term implications? Like for GE, it was a turnaround project that was being handled by either Bain or McKinsey. And at the end of the day, like that was a huge long-term implication. That was what was going to happen to a company that had been around for over 100 years, over a century, and now it had to make a complete turnaround. It would be the future of this company, and that was a long-term implication. Now, Pizza Hut is going through that similarly. Domino's has destroyed Pizza Hut and market share. Pizza Hut had a ton of money coming in at like 2002 and even up to like 2016, but Domino's had much better marketing, and they did like stints like where they would fill up the potholes in your roads and then put the Domino's logo on those potholes, and they got a lot of market share that way. And so Pizza Hut is doing a complete rebrand by basically focusing in on being like comedic and funny. They're currently sponsoring the Domino's tournament, which isn't actually the Domino's restaurant, but like the Domino's, like the little white squares. And what they're getting is a lot of press because people are thinking that Pizza Hut is sponsoring Domino's Pizza. And so, what are the long term implications? Is this going to be a major turnaround or just a new offer? Or is this just like a quick research of like what are our competitors doing? Then, going into asking the questions for the client, you want to ask what the client wants. Be very, very specific. Now, when I used to do consulting, when we were talking to our clients, we would ask a ton of questions, and there would be at least 4 to 5 weeks before any of the consultants were staffed onto my team for each project. It would just be me, my managing director, and my projects director, and just like us three and the client on like a Zoom call or in person, going over hour-long meetings, talking about every question we could. There was, 15, 20, sometimes 45 pages of documents created in terms of notes, in terms of like contracts, and it was very prudent that we made sure that the what the client wanted was cemented and actually put into contract. Because oftentimes a client will say something and then they'll add on other stuff, and at the end of the day, you want to get billed for that. But more importantly, as a consultant, if you're breaking into consulting or you're a consultant already, you want to know what the client wants because your goal isn't necessarily, yes, your goal is to make the client money, but your goal is to do what the client asks for. Like if you work at McDonald's and someone is like, "Hey, I want a Big Mac," and you're like, "Actually, you would probably like the McFlurry more." You're not going to go into the kitchen and make a McFlurry and give that to the customer. You're going to give them the Big Mac, even if you don't agree with it. And so, you need to make sure you actually service the client's basic needs first. Now, if you are thinking they're going to enjoy the McFlurry, yeah, make the McFlurry with the Big Mac, give it to them. If they throw it out, fine. If they eat it, great. But you also have to make sure that you give the McFlurry for free or for a very discounted rate. Then what the client said. Now, oftentimes what the client said might not be exactly what they want, and you need to have that be specific too. Either record meetings or take notes often. If you're breaking into consulting and you're in a client meeting by chance, take a ton of notes and make it very clear that you put in their body language or like certain notes as well, because then you can start to see what is like their perspective from their end. They might be getting pressurized to do this project, or they might have some extra needs that they have, but they're not able to completely say them out loud. And if you can really pick up on these cues, you can make sure your project goes successfully later down the road. Then, what the consultant heard. Now, this is going to be different than what the client wants or said, because at the end of the day, everyone interprets questions differently. Now, if someone says, "I want to enter the market for streaming services," now, I'm sticking to CNN Plus for this example, but I want to enter the streaming services market, and my company is CNN, and the consultant might hear that I want to enter the market, and that's it. But the client might want that they may enter the market and make profit, like tons of profit. And the consultant would be, screwed if they just give a market plan or a market entry plan or strategy that isn't profitable from like the first year onwards. And so what the consultant heard, and then finally what the consultant did. So I'll give you an example. I once worked for a Fortune 50 company that was handling about 1,100 assets across three countries, I think. And these assets were worth, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. And the project had uh, basically we were trying to create an asset utilization model. We were trying to manage all their 1,100 assets instantly. Now, I have a software engineering background, so I hired a ton of software engineering backed consultants for this specific project when I was working for like the small consulting firm. And what ended up happening was in the first 6 months, the project was supposed to take only 6 months in the beginning, and in the first 6 months, we were not able to create a full software. So we created uh, a spreadsheet that was like with had a ton of macros, like I mean, like tens of sheets of macros that could get the job done. Because the first 5 months, it just took that much time to collect all the data. Because this was like a very data oriented project and they didn't have clean data, so we had to clean that whole data. Additionally, like there was over like 14 different direct stakeholders, people that directly we needed to report to instead of just one client. And so it became a little confusing. And so what we did as consultants wasn't exactly what they wanted. They wanted a software. We created an Excel sheet, and there was reasons for that. But at the end of the day, what the client wants is what we need to deliver to them. And so what we did was we asked them. We like I got on a meeting with the client. I sold them on another 6 month project and said like we will get this done and we will do it for cheaper than we did before. But we're very close, and the first 6 months we did like the brunt of the project, which is data collection and data cleaning. We can get this done, and then the next 6 months we did, and we saved them $85 million over 5 years, so about a little more than $16 million a year, which is like good money for this company. And so at the end of the day, what the client says, wants are separate, and then what the consultant heard and writes down as an example, and then what the consultant did are separate as well. Now, you want to make sure that at the end of the day, the client gets what they want, no matter how difficult it is, no matter how unreasonable it is. At the end of the day, as a consultant, you're going to do exactly what the client wants, and that's the way it is. You're supposed to do that. Like if a retail worker is so nice to you as a customer, imagine what a client that's giving you hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars is worth. Then there's research. Now, in another video later, I will go into qualitative versus quantitative research, but I wanted to cover primary versus secondary because people sometimes forget this. So, yeah, we learned this in like fourth, maybe eighth grade, but primary research is interviews. It's, straight from the horse's mouth. I think that's the saying. But there's places like Maven and Intro where you can interview really, really famous people, smart people, industry experts, and you can figure out exactly what they think about the industry, about your project. Everyone signs non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, and you can give this as research to your client who might not have access to these people. Sometimes I even pulled off like interviewing their own competitors, and yes, the competitors would know I'm working on a project with another competitor, but because they didn't know exactly who it was, there was less animosity, they were less mad if they told me, and so generally they were more willing to. And sometimes clients hire simply because they want these interviews. And then there's reports, which are like secondary research, which is like market reports, and that can come from places like, it can come from like places like Gartner, it can come from places like Forbes, it can come from places like Harvard Business Review. Um, and again, this is something a client can do, but reading these reports and analyzing them, making sense of them, checking that the facts are correct can take hours, if not weeks. And so they do this to like avoid grunt work, and consultants are more than happy to read market reports, because you read one market report, it'll help you on another project. And so for a consultant, there's a lot more leverage to reading these reports, whereas for a client, not necessarily. Then we have the solution, which oftentimes it can be a white paper, an MVP, or a PowerPoint. Now, a PowerPoint is very easy. PowerPoints are made to sell an idea. You make them pretty, and you're pretty good. You make them quick to read. So a great way to go about making a PowerPoint is you have like an action-oriented title. So let's make sure you guys can actually see this. And then on like this is going to be your main slide, and then oh, I don't think you guys can see that. This is going to be your main slide, and okay, now you can. And then this is going to be a kicker, which is basically the TLDR. So TLDR kicker, and this way you can like someone can read the title, the TLDR, and skip past the slides. When you're working with executives, they oftentimes don't have the time to read everything you wrote down on that PowerPoint or even be in the meeting. So you want it to be quick to read, you want it to be pretty so that people are engaged, and generally a PowerPoint sells an idea. Then we have white papers, which are PowerPoints but ugly. Um, and essentially, they're just a lot of paper, a lot of documentation. Usually, if you're working with legal firms or companies that have legal firms handle this stuff, you're going to be writing white papers. Sometimes it's got a lot of diagrams. It could be a research paper essentially. And this is really helpful because like someone can look back at this and really dive in deep into what you were doing as a in your project. But generally, it is a little less fun than a PowerPoint, because PowerPoints look nicer. They they sell an idea, so everyone feels kind of happy selling something. And then lastly, we have an MVP, and this is something as small as an Excel sheet, like what I did, or for like the first 6 months. Or I'm going to put this down here, but this is for MVP, just so you guys know. Um, and then it could be as small as an Excel sheet, but it could also be, like Zapier, which is like automation software that you can create like a small little software. You can even use like ChatGPT to code something up, maybe. Um, but this is like a minimum viable product, basically something they can take in and say like, hey, this is going to work. We can, market validate it. And then lastly, it's upsell. Now, every project, every problem leads to a solution, which will lead to your future problem. A consultant's job is to figure out what is the future problem and then determine how they can help fix it and then sell that future solution. And a way to do that is called problem. Is it's called pass, but that's called problem, which is you mentioned the future problem. Then you agitate, which is like you go, hey, this is going to be really bad because this is going to like make things difficult to grow, scale. It's going to become really annoying because your costs are going to go up. And then you give them the solution. And then, once you're done with that, you bring in the money. And this can be like an upsell that's like a much more expensive project. But this is how consultants keep making more and more money. And that's how you have the cycle, which it goes from problem, question, research, solution. The solution leads to the next problem, which you sell, and then you do the whole thing again. And so this is exactly what a consultant does. It's very simple. They solve problems. They're usually hired because they have some expertise or they have a lot of time on their hands to do the stuff that client feels is either a waste of time, doesn't want the consequences on their back for, or they sometimes actually hire consultants because they want to see who to recruit and get some profit out of it because they got a project done at the same time. So I hope you enjoyed Please feel free to subscribe if you are enjoying this content. I make this for free because I want to help anyone out there to enter the consulting market or really just uh, figure out what they want in life because I've switched a career.